Over the last year, I've built a workshop, started a YouTube channel, restored tools, made tools, and generally been practicing my skills. And now I want to put all of what I've learned, restored, and made into use and build a piece of furniture. It's going to be a fairly simple piece of furniture, but one which will challenge me in a bunch of different ways. Now, the wood I'm using here is just some cheap and ordinary pine, which I'd used previously to make a couple of rough and temporary table legs. Pine is a wood that has very easy to read grain, and by playing with the orientation of the pieces of wood you have, you can really transform the overall effect. In one orientation I can see knots, defects, curving grain, and all manner of aberrations. But if I flip things around a bit and pay attention to the wood I'm choosing to use, it looks consistent and considered. Now, obviously it's still full of screw holes, which I can't avoid, not without filling them or buying fresh wood, which I want to avoid. Most of these will get cut off anyway, and any that remain I'm going to look at as character marks or little indications of the wood's history. And I'm not really sure screw holes count as historical character marks, but it's how I'm choosing to justify them. Anyway, after chopping off most of the character marks and resawing each of the pieces a bit thinner, I can move on to planing them all smooth and square. But first, I'm going to make sure my plane is good and sharp, and I've decided it's time to set up a dedicated sharpening and flattening area in my shed. Now, my shed isn't very big, but keeping my tools sharp is going to be important throughout this process, and having a space permanently set up for it is going to save a lot of time. So, I tidied up what was sort of a dumping corner and got to work with this new Veritas Mark II honing guide, which was a birthday gift from my parents. I think I made a comment in one of my previous videos about not necessarily needing fancy honing guides and jigs, and while not essential, a quality one like this really helps with consistency and accuracy. With the plane sharp and set, I can get to work flattening all of the pieces ready for gluing. I always find it really cool watching what you previously thought was a pretty smooth piece of wood become an even smoother piece of wood. And shavings of wood like this are nothing new, but they're always super satisfying. Anyway, with everything nice and square, I can get these seat pieces glued and into clamps. Or I could if the glue bottle wasn't blocked again. After a little bit of faffing, I got the nozzle cleared out and got the pieces glued together, and then I could start on the legs. Again, I made a conscious effort to select the best, straightest grained pieces of wood which will look good in the final stool, but they'll also be much easier to work with when it comes to cutting the joinery. Much the same as the seat, the process for the legs is the same. Cut to rough size, plane square and smooth, and repeat until everything is ready for the next step, which is cutting the joinery. By the time I'd planed and smoothed all of the leg pieces, the seat was dry, so I could trim and smooth that too. And this is where I could really start to see my earlier choice with the wood grain starting to pay off. The underside, which you'll never see, has a bunch of knots and imperfections, but the top looks very clean and consistent. The trimmed ends were a little rough, which is probably down to the saw I used being a little bit old and dull, but it did give me an opportunity to try out something I've not really done before, which is use a shooting board. I made this one specifically for this project, as I knew there'd be parts like this rough end that I'd need to clean and square up. And there's probably a learning curve here to get the best out of it, but I think I ended up with pretty decent results. Right, onto the joinery. I'm putting these legs in at an angle, so I'm marking areas on the top and the underside of the seat where I can chop out a mortise from either side and hopefully meet in the middle. I freehanded this first one, but as you'll see in a minute, I used a guide to help with the correct angle on the rest of them. Chopping these mortises out was a fairly quick process and was actually really satisfying and fulfilling, as I got to use my recently restored chisels and the mallet I made for myself, all of which felt good and worked great. Once I had one mortise cut, I moved on to a tenon on one of the legs. I figured if I practiced one mortise and one tenon, I'd learn a few things that could be helpful when I moved on to all of the others. And I wasn't wrong. When it came time to trying out the tenon in the mortise, things took an unfortunate turn. This is one of the drawbacks to working with softer woods, but also a side effect of not paying full attention. I think I got a bit whack happy with the mallet and ended up with this mistake. But you live and learn. And the piece that broke off I'm going to glue back into place, and once I've planed and sanded everything, it shouldn't really be visible. After that was dry, I could move on to chopping out the other mortises. And this time around, I used an angle guide to help make sure the mortises were all at the right angle, as in the correct angle, not a right angle, which would have been wrong. Anyway, when I tried the legs out this time, I kept a very close eye on the other side to make sure I didn't repeat the same mistake again. Luckily, I managed to get the rest of the legs in without issue, and then it was on to cutting the rest of the joinery, which was a mixture of more angled mortise and tenon joints. There wasn't anything particularly special about these joints, but it's something I don't do very much of, so it was a good chance to practice and learn a few things. And I didn't do everything perfectly, but with a bit of trial and error, I got everything cut and fitting together nicely. I was almost ready to glue everything together, but first I gave everything a little clean up with the plane to remove pencil marks and add a slight chamfer to the sharp edges. Then I cut some slots for wedges in the main leg tenons and made some wedges to go into those tenons. I'd already done a dry fit, so I knew everything fitted together, but one thing I couldn't try was the wedges. I knew they'd fit, but my lack of experience with wedge tenons meant that I didn't account for the fact that the legs could split below the tenon, or at least mine did anyway. I have a few theories as to why this happened, but I think the simplest solution would have been to not do wedge tenons at all. I think in this particular case, they're an unnecessary complication that doesn't really add any extra strength. I just got carried away with trying to make things fancier than they needed to be. I do like the way they look though, minus the old screw holes or character marks, which ended up right in the middle of the tenons. Anyway, regrets aside, I think this stool is shaping up pretty well, and I think compared to some of the hand-cut joinery I've made in the past, this is certainly an improvement. The last thing the stool needs is for the legs to be trimmed so that they're level and sit flat. So, got the stool level with shims, marked the legs, and then trimmed them to size. And the stool is done. I'm not going to add any finish to this, as I really like the way the raw pine looks and feels. And even though I spent a lot of time getting things as perfect as I could, aside from a bunch of obvious mistakes, I want this stool to get battered, weathered and worn in years to come, assuming it lasts that long. And it's at least strong enough for me to stand on it. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.